And we are live with our 147th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We are really excited today to have James Kettle on with us to discuss Portswigger and Burp Suite and request smuggling and all the things that he's been doing recently. Just before we dive into it and do a quick introduction, we don't have really a lot that's going on. Please jump into the Slack channel if you have questions or post them to the YouTube page as we're going on today. But the Slack invite is available at absoluteappsec.com if you want to join the conversation. Outside of that, Ken, I don't think I've got a lot of other announcements right now. There's not many people traveling, or there's not a lot of in-person conferences. I think we all know that. So I think we can just dive right into it, unless there's something else, Ken.
I don't think there's anything else to sort of cover. So I don't think James needs much of an introduction. If you're doing web security, you've undoubtedly come across, and we've talked about your research a ton on this show, James. I mean, there's probably at least like 20% of our episodes that cover something that you and your team have discovered. So everybody's very likely very familiar with James's work. Some of the latest stuff has been really cool around request smuggling. And so, I think today we just kind of wanted to, like we normally do, get to know you, find out a little bit about your background. Mainly, also, I to start with, sort of your origin story. Like it's always interesting to find out how people get into the role, but especially that they're in, but especially when it's a security researcher role. If we could start off, like, how did you get interested in what you do, and how you ended up, throughout the years getting to the point where you're at now?
Sure, yeah. So I got into security relatively late in the game, age-wise, when I was at university. And the actual thing that drove me to try and learn these skills was I used to play this online computer game quite a lot called Soldat. It's this Polish side-scrolling shooter, and I was reasonably good at it, right? But there was this guy that sold cheats for this game, so there were loads of hackers in this game, and they were ruining it for the people that weren't cheating. And he was selling his cheats via this website, and I was like, I wonder if I knew how to hack, I could just take control over this website and like replace the cheat with a virus. Just deletes the computer, and it will serve these cheaters right. So I spent a bunch of time learning about cross-site scripting, but cross-site scripting wasn't going to work on that site. And then I learned cross-site request forgery. And this was back in 2008. And then cross-site request forgery worked on everything.
Yeah.
And I established that I could compromise with the website with this. And then I started to think through the other aspects of this plan and decided maybe it wasn't the best idea after all. And I'd probably get caught, and the AppSec was terrible, and so on.
That's interesting. So late in the game, so you're at the university. What were you studying at that time?
That was computer science.
Oh, you were doing computer science. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, there's a lot of us that have that background, right? So you started like looking at the website. I mean, was that was your first introduction into security? From there, did you?
Yeah, that was it.
In, or what?
I just Googled stuff, and after finding that, I saw some like newspaper article about how it was like Google or eBay or someone had paid someone for a vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So then I got into bug bounty hunting. I hunted on Google for a couple of years. And it ended up in their top 10, like way back then. And then I worked as a pen tester for a couple of years after university. And I just never found, it's like once I understand an issue, I find it boring. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be finding the same issue day in, day out. So that's what drove me to go for the research role at Portswigger when I saw it advertised, because it was like, well, here you're not finding the same issue, you're just trying to find something new all the time. which keeps it interesting.
That's a really good point, right? Like, Ken, I know you and I have discussed this, right? Having done security and been pen tester since about the same time as you, James, like, mid to late 2000, I don't know how to call the aughts, whatever. That XSS just doesn't have the same effect on us that it did back then, right? Like, it's great that you can find another bypass and maybe get around, some filter, but it just doesn't hit quite the same as it did that first time that you find something. And so it's really hard to get super excited about it.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of those things, like, it's useful. It gets the job done. Yeah. When I do a pen test, I'm trying to, I did one for a charitable thing recently. And I was trying all these really advanced techniques, and none of them worked. And then they had stored XSS, and it was so disappointing.
It's so disappointing.
I don't want to be hacking things using techniques that are that well understood. It's just boring.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're in a great role then, where you're currently at. And I love this, like, this path that you've gone through the bug bounty world. Cause when we came up, that did not exist, right? Like, there was this idea of, responsible disclosure if you found something on a company's website, but there was no real pathway there to actually get paid. It just shows how much the industry has kind of grown over the years. And I know you're still pretty actively involved. I mean, you still do bug bounties, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I basically use them as a tool to prove that my research really works, because you can present the most amazing sounding thing, but if you didn't actually exploit a real target with it, people will just diss it, regardless of whether it might be good, it might not be good, but you have to prove it's good by hitting a real target. Yep. And bug bounties let me do that legally, which is good.
Yeah, which is good. Ken's got a story about, I don't remember, like the Pentagon or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Pentagon, FBI, or NCIS. Yeah. Super fun stuff. So, yeah. So the way you're doing it is much better. So some of us were a bit dumber about the way we went about it earlier on. But did you have, when you were a child, like, did you have any, like, what kind of got you into the computer science path to begin with? Did you have any inclinations as a kid that you would, like, want to do that as a future career, or was it something that was just sort of like a practical choice? Or how did that all sort of come about for you?
I've never really thought about that. I started coding a bit when I was 14, I think. I always liked playing games. I coded my own text adventure in QBasic, and it was 10,000 lines, and I didn't know how to make functions. I literally I had this massive book on QBasic, and I read like the first chapter. So I had if, and I had go to, and I didn't have any functions. It was fantastic.
That's amazing. I feel like you should post that up on your site.
I don't think I've got the code anymore, unfortunately. It's in an attic somewhere.
Yeah. Well, if anyone can find James's code, like, we'll send you a T-shirt or something, right? Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Well, cool. Ken, did you have another question? Sorry.
I was going to kind of just, ask, like, with research, one of the questions I have is, like, how is your, I don't know how to ask this, but, like, how is your day structured? How do you choose what things you're going to research? Like, is this something where you're more working backwards from, here's some targets I'd like to try and find weaknesses on, and then you sort of go from there? Or is it the reverse of that, where you think you've sort of researched a vulnerability and then it sounded like it was that, like, where you find something you're interested in, you dig in deep, and then try to apply it against bug bounties. I'm more curious how our researchers sort of, like, structure, what does that look like for you?
There's different ways of doing it. The way that I do it is I basically have a list of ideas for, maybe I can hack things by doing X, Y, Z. And the list, it grows over time, and part of it's based on, I'll read someone else's research, and I'll be like, I wonder if they tried this thing, because they didn't say if they tried it or not, and such like. Or maybe they'll just be ideas based, so from loads of different sources, I have this massive pool of things that might work. And then what I try and do is I pick things out from there, and I try and establish how I can basically test this idea and see whether it really works on any real sites as quickly as possible. Because some things will take you you'll have to invest weeks of time just to test the hypothesis, does this concept work? And then you'll try it and it won't work, and you've just wasted weeks. And it's inevitable that will happen with research. You're always going to have loads of bad ideas. And for me, the key thing is I've got this Burp project file that has every bug bounty website loaded into it already. And my extensions work at that scale. So I just Control A, select 300,000 requests and say, run my scan on this. And I use a little framework that I wrote that basically lets me write a basic scan check that tests an idea. And it takes like 15 minutes to code it up and maybe 2 hours to run it on the project file. And then so that way I can just very quickly test, does this idea work? Is it worth pursuing? Or is it just a waste of time?
So, and that, I mean, I think that's important to note, right? Especially on both sides of the researcher crowd and on like the pen tester crowd, is how many of the ideas just don't go anywhere. Because I know I've spent, at this point in my career, hundreds, if not thousands of hours trying to track down vulnerabilities that just don't exist, right? That's the nature of the game. So in your experience, how often of all this research that you and the Portswigger team puts out, like how many of the ideas that you trace down actually result in verifiable research? What would you say a percentage? Just ballpark.
It's hard to put an accurate number on it, and it depends where you draw the line and so on. But maybe I would say maybe 70% are just junk. Okay. There's some stuff. There's some reoccurring. Often when I publish some research, people say, "Did you try X, Y, Z?" And some of those are just massive time sinks and don't go anywhere. Like everyone says, "Have you tried using trailing HTTP1 headers?" Yeah. And it's like, yeah, actually, I have, and it was the biggest waste of time. I'm not saying you shouldn't try that for sure, but when I tried it, it did not work. Yeah.
Well, and that's, I mean, that's the name of the game, right? Is figuring out what's actually doable. It's interesting that you've got that process down as far as this huge list of, this huge state file or this huge project file with all these endpoints, and they're able to actually quickly analyze that. And I don't think on our side there's enough attention paid to the setup that it takes to actually do some of this, right? Getting your burp state or your burp project configured properly in order to run is, it's crucial to actually finding vulnerabilities and finding research, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how my research works. Sorry, it's essential that you can test things fast, because it's worth trying really stupid ideas if you can test them fast. And some really stupid ideas have amazing results. So you want to be trying them. Sorry.
It sounds like you, I interrupted. I just thought I had, it sounds like, are you using a pretty burp extender pretty seriously I know you said you have your own custom framework. I'm wondering if that's something that you just use, it's plugged in via some sort of extension into Burp, or if it's outside of that completely.
No, yes. So the Burp extensions that I release are all the extensions that I used for my research.
Very cool.
That's why they have certain quirks. Like you might notice they've got an insane number of settings. Yes. Some of them, or they just have basically all the decisions made in the design of those weren't made for you. They were made for me to do the research with. So that's why they let you like they're extremely powerful, but they also have massive foot guns. It's like if you check the wrong box, then you'll just completely break Burp, and there's no documentation and so on. But it's useful. It's still useful to people.
Right, for sure. One of the things that when we do so we give Seth and I this secure code training course, but what we talk about is like what it's like to actually sit down and do this. And some of the tips we give people are, try to, like in terms of your workflow, like try to cut out the noise for 2 hours or whatever your limit for your attention span is. Try not to make it too personal, don't get too emotionally invested in the outcome. Just stay a little bit more, around the process. And I'm just curious if you have some tips for budding researchers along the same lines of like, what are common frustrations that you come across? How do you kind of structure your approach? Like, are there any little sort of tips, like zone in, like with noise canceling headphones? I noticed you got the headphones on, like, are there anything like that you can provide, research, upcoming researchers out there?
Off the top of my head, nothing quite that broad. I would say there's some mistakes that are quite easy to make, but they're less about the environment you do the research in and more about what your goals are and that kind of thing. Like you might do some research that's really technically amazing, but it only works on one website on the whole internet. And I think that's still an awesome research. I would still really value that. Or people will do extremely good research, but they just won't quite sell it, right? Like they'll just put it in a write-up with a title that doesn't get people to click it or provide any context, and fill it with memes and write it in broken English. I mean, obviously that's not their choice.
Yes.
But it's like, as hackers, we value the technical side more than everything else, and
right.
That's great. But if you want other people to be building it on your research, they need to read it. And so it's worth putting a lot. Once you've got something good, it's really important to put quite a lot of thought into how you communicate it.
So there's a marketing component to all of this that you can't sort of you shouldn't ignore.
Kind of, but I wouldn't exactly diss it by calling it a marketing component. Yeah. Like people will publish an amazing theoretical technique and they won't apply it to a single site, or barely. And so actually it would work on loads of sites, but they just didn't bother doing that. Like when I did my cause exploiting cause misconfigurations for Bitcoins and bounties, I read someone else's post and they described the exact technique that I used, and I just put it in my pipeline and got a load of case studies and put it in Burp Scanner, so Burp flags it, and that was one of my most popular pieces of research. Obviously I cited them at the top of the work,
Sure.
And it was hardly any work on my behalf because they did all the research.
Yeah, I'd almost say it's a lot of kind of the soft skills, not necessarily marketing, but just just framing the research and framing it, like getting feedback from people you trust to be able to push that out. I mean, is that something that you do? Do you have a team that reviews your research or reviews your output before it goes live? I mean, I know you've got like the Portswigger team. Is that how you guys function?
It does get internally reviewed.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, that definitely helps. But I think the main thing is, I think everyone knows how to make stuff better. It's just about putting the time in. It's just how much do you value helping people understand what you've done?
Uh-huh.
Or how much do you have this view that, if they don't understand it, they aren't worthy? I'm sure there's a bit of that behind a lot of poorly explained research. Is they're just like, well, either you understand it or you don't.
Yeah, but to have some mass adoption, or to make it easier to have folks build, like you said, build upon your research, having it well written, seems like there's a lot of value in that, obviously. and explaining well. And one of the things I like about your post too, whenever you release your research, is the ability to sort of like literally, like, this is going to make me sound stupid, but the imagery and the visual representations you provide. I will say that, to your point, it's very easy to understand, I think, very easy to consume. It's well done, and definitely reduces friction to building upon that research.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, it's just the time that you put in on it. And I am privileged working as a full-time researcher. I'm allowed to spend like 6 weeks working on a presentation, basically full-time. If you're just doing it in your evenings, you probably don't. You're just going to be focusing on what you enjoy, and that's fine. Fair enough. Yeah,
absolutely.
I've just shared a link, which is, so I've got a write-up explaining all the advice that I have on how to do security research well. So hopefully there's some useful tips in there.
Yeah, and I have posted it up too, right? Because it is it is relevant, right? I don't know. Ken and I have talked about this quite a few times, right? Like, because we've both been involved on the company side of the bug bounty programs, right? And the amount of times that I get, a report that comes in that's just like, hey, I was able to do this, without any sort of like impact statement, or they didn't actually run it through all the way to exploit it completely, or, they just didn't take the time to write it up. Which means it takes me more time to actually analyze the impact and give a payout, but it also impacts like future interactions that we have. That I would recommend that people actually go and look at something like that, right? As far as how do you document and how do you represent yourself when you're providing results, whether that's in a report as a pen tester or in a research report as a bug bounty researcher. Like that will materially affect how much you actually make, right? Like I think we discount that quite a bit because we are so technical, right?
Yeah, that's it. There's just this tendency to only value the technical side.
Yeah.
Which can undersell it.
Yeah.
In effect.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. It's easy for me, looking at it from a company's perspective where they're like, oh, well, if the risk is only X because you were only able to get one record, I'm only going to pay you for getting one record, right? Even though had you taken the time to actually expand that out and explain it well, that you could get 1 million, right? There's a real like impact to the company there.
Yeah. I mean, there's always two sides to it. Sometimes I found my SSRF on Yahoo. And then went exploring on their internal network, and they were really not happy with that. But yeah.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and
I didn't even find anything that interesting.
Well, hey, for what it's worth, GitHub, we have an SSRF target that I can, if you'd like, we can point.
Yeah, I haven't hacked GitHub much, have I? I should fix that.
You should
yes. Well, if you're
there, you go, Ken.
This is my promo to hack on GitHub now. I am curious. Like, I know this is probably a tough question, just because research. It's research, so some of the things you're working on, you may not even want to discuss. But I'm curious what web security trends interest you, as of late, or if there are any trends you're noticing on the whole that we should all maybe be paying a little bit more attention to. I know request smuggling's obviously been a big topic for us for sure lately, especially. So just sort of like anything that you actually can share, if you can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so people who follow my research closely can probably guess what I'm going to be saying here. But basically, on the one hand, systems are getting more secure in terms of you've got frameworks preventing a bunch of the classic bugs out of the box, making things like XSS, cross-site request, forgery, SQL injection less common, although obviously there's still edge cases and old apps and bad frameworks and so on. But so in things that are getting tougher on that side, but on the other side, things are just getting more and more complex, and people are stitching together different architectures. And it's like, it's, you know, a web application used to just be one server, right? And now you're lucky if it's just got a front end and maybe a few backends. You see whole loads of sites that have like multiple layers of caching on different servers, and they're just getting routed through these crazy chains. And it's just creating more and more problems, and the problems are also maybe getting harder to find as well.
Yeah, I think we've noticed, and one of the things Seth and I have talked a bit about is that with more complex distributed environments, stuff like SSRF has, not only has it been the case for me anyways, where it's been a more prevalent finding than it has ever been before, but also like the impact is usually pretty high, even though there's been some efforts like the Amazon's like, what is it? I can't remember anymore. IMS or something, V2 or whatever it is, where it makes SSRF and grabbing metadata creds like harder. There have been some changes for sure, but like that's one thing I would say. Yeah, we've seen and talked a lot about the fact that these distributed systems are making things like SSRF more impactful and easy to find. It feels like, I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, they're just creating I think the research that Orange Sci has done over the last few years is also great examples of just, you have a front end and a back end, and they do like path normalization slightly differently, and the result is an absolute disaster. Or the exchange stuff. I've only had a cursory skim on this. I haven't dived into it properly, but basically, it's these crazy complex systems creating bugs that you have to invest loads of time just to understand what's happening. But then once you do, the whole thing just falls apart.
Oh,
super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, James, I always see these authorization issues, especially as you start to have all the different systems that talk to each other. And that's where the request smuggling comes into play as well, is we're starting to trust these internal systems to talk to one another. We've got Kubernetes, like huge Kubernetes installs that, all the microservices have to access each other. And the second that you start to find that the caching or whatever else, authorization just seems to fall apart. We've still got this tight outer, or this tough outer shell where we do all of our authentication, authorization. But once you get into that squishy inner middle, it feels like, you're right, it falls apart.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just due to, if it's the complexity that we're talking about there, or it's a lack of developer understanding about what's going on between those different services, or the amount of time that it takes to build something like that. But it is, it's difficult. And I know from a developer perspective, it's difficult. So I don't like finding those issues externally as a bug bounty researcher, or as a researcher in general, feels very kind of bespoke, right? Like the application that you're looking at may not, or that technique for the one site may not apply to another one. Is that what you're finding, or are you still finding a lot of the smuggling where it goes across the board?
So I think there are loads of juicy bugs that are caused by overcomplexity that you will only find by gaining a really good understanding of one target. Yeah. And if you were to tell me that I had to actually work as a bug bounty hunter and I needed that income, then I would pick one target, like a big target, and get to understand it really well and find bugs that way. Like I would attempt to do what File Descriptor did with Twitter, basically, where I swear he gets like half their total payouts.
Yeah.
Just because he just hammers that one target and has an understanding of it that's so much better. He can find the same bug as someone else, but then get 5 times the impact because he can chain it with his bag of other things that he knows about that target that no one else actually knew.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to push out to anyone that's listening is, yes, there is this tendency in the bug bounty, at least in the reports that I see, to go pull the latest CVE, scan a site for it, and then submit the bug. And
everyone's trying to get the low-hanging fruit, right? Everyone wants the easy wins. They're all focused on recon, just finding the really ancient subdomains and getting shells. And I mean, that does work too, but it's not the only way of doing it.
No, and what excites me when I get those bug bounty reports is exactly what you're saying. When I see someone that has an understanding of the application and the company they're looking at, and then are chaining together, oh, here's an information disclosure along with an insecure direct object reference, along with, maybe an SSRF, and all of a sudden they have all this customer data. Guess what? We're going to pay that out, right? Because you've actually understood the architecture, you've understood the controls that this company has in place, and you can make quite a bit, probably more money doing it that way than you could just sending your one scanner at 100 or 1,000 different sites. But that's just anecdotal for me. So
I think you're competing with less people that way. If you focus on one target, you're competing with a tiny pool of people. If you're trying to make the one piece of code that works on a ton of sites, you're competing with a huge number of other bug bounty hunters. To be fair, though, that kind of automation way is how I do it for my research. But it is kind of different because I'm not using CVEs, and I'm just testing ideas out that take me 15 minutes, and they work because it's things like desynchronization and request smuggling. They will find the one company that has this front end in front of this back end, which causes this edge case and then blows up.
What triggered that thought in your head, by the way, to try desync attacks / request smuggling in general? These are things that are, I don't know. It's just that's quite a spark of creativity.
It's not really, actually. So I watched. One thing I do as a researcher is I look at other people's research. So I watched Regilero did a presentation in DEF CON called HP Wookiee smuggling. And I watched the presentation and I was like, this makes no sense to me. I don't understand it in the slightest. And I was basically scared of it. And so I kind of made this excuse in my head as to why this didn't fall within my research remit, and thereby I didn't have to understand it. And then about a year later, I discovered the Watchfire white paper on request smuggling. And I was like, right, it's this thing again. I'm going to have another go. And I just tried that. I looked through the techniques. I took the one that was easiest to implement, which was basically a cl.te desync. I wrote, a really basic thing, took me 15 minutes, and I ran it, and it worked on every single website using Akamai. And it was like, in that moment, I'd spent half an hour on this thing, and I instantly knew that this was serious and it was worth spending more time on it.
Nice. Yeah, I was just sort of like, okay, that totally makes sense. And it's interesting. I wasn't able to pull up the second source you cited, but at the first YouTube link there is the Wookiees in HTTP talk. Yeah.
Let me find out for you.
Yeah. And James, while you're looking that up, in your day-to-day, how much of your time is spent looking at other research or other things that have come out?
I would say maybe like an hour a day or something.
Okay.
Ish. It varies, depending on how recently certain conferences were.
Yeah.
And so on. Maybe less than that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's tricky. I mean, these days I'm mostly doing follow-ups on my own research. So I don't spend as much time looking at other people's work. But yeah.
And then when you are following other people, you're mentioning some of these different resources, where is it that where do you go to actually find that research?
So I follow people on Twitter, basically.
Okay.
And I also read NetSec, which is good for the stuff that doesn't go on Twitter. And the main trick is, which I mentioned in that blog post about being a web security researcher, is if I read something good, then I read everything on that blog. And that was how, I believe that was how I found that Watchfire paper on request smuggling, which caused the HB desync research. I read something else by Amit Klein, and I was like, this guy really knew what he was doing and was saying really cool stuff, even though it was in 2004 or something. And so I just read everything else that he wrote that I could find.
Okay. No, and that's, I mean, again, that's a good tip, right? Is because, you know, a lot of those single like Medium blog posts or whatever come out, they don't have all of the background that's associated with the research or how the researcher got to that point. So understanding their thinking before then, or reading about the other research, even if it's only tangentially related, will, I mean, it causes more thoughts, right? It causes more impetus to actually go out and do something else.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, if they've done good research once, they've probably done it in the past. And good research, the probability that good research actually gets shared widely is quite low. So if I spot something and it's not from like someone I actually follow on Twitter, then it's been shared widely. So there's probably at least 5 other posts that same person did that no one read. And I definitely want to be reading those ones.
Okay. Yeah. No, and that's good to know, right? Like I know that's been something I've been struggling with recently, as far as where good research is being posted, right? I mean, there is still the stuff that comes out on Twitter, but it does feel like in the last 5 years or so, there's not quite as much active publishing going on, you know, at least on Twitter, right? Our NetSec seems to be good. Somebody else recommended Lobsters, right?
I use Slack. Well. I use various Slack workspaces too, just to join, you know, I mean, that's another area where that seems, for me, that's been more useful than Twitter, but I don't know how it is for you, James.
Occasionally I find some decent stuff in Slack, but I get a lot of DMs asking for burp support whenever I'm in a Slack channel.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Speaking as someone who gets a lot of support requests for GitHub accounts being locked out, or
yeah, I bet.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Yeah,
I'm still
Discord too.
Permanently banned from Uber, so if you know anyone from Uber, they can unban me.
I used to, not anymore. That's hilarious. Yeah.
That sounds like a story. I don't know if I want to. Yeah. Is that something you could talk about, James? What happened there?
I was hacking on them, and you know, I got paid some stuff, and then I registered. I managed to register as a Uber freight driver by, you know, bypassing a bunch of client side controls and then using a real card to pay some real money for it. And then I think something just flagged something, and I haven't been able to use Uber ever since.
Maybe they're doing something right over there, I guess, you know, detecting that. That's funny that
their banning it is pretty good, because I tried to bypass it by changing SIM, and that didn't work, and by changing card, and that didn't work. So it's like, it isn't just the number or the SIM or the card. So yeah, wow. They've definitely got some pretty fancy stuff there.
Yeah, that's very intense. Interesting.
I'm pretty sure you could bypass it eventually, right? You know,
I think you would need a completely, like, a new phone with a new SIM, with a new card, maybe with a different name, all at the same time. Yeah, that should do the job.
That should do it.
Legally change your name, get a new ID. It's very simple to bypass. No, that's hilarious. Do you have I was going to ask you, because you had mentioned frameworks doing things a little bit more, handling a lot by default in terms of like CSRF for XSS protections, ORMs that protect against injection. Do you have any preferences for web frameworks that you feel are more doing that better, more securely, or and alternatively, are there any frameworks that are kind of sketch?
Yeah,
so
I
to
mean,
say?
yeah, more the latter.
The latter.
We saw when we were making Burp Enterprise, they were like, "So we're thinking of using Angular JS," and then Gareth and I were like, "No, don't do it." So yeah, we're using React for that. Yeah, and similar, the like out of my cache poisoning research and such, like I found some crazy headers, like X original URL, that were coming from PHP frameworks that were based on the Zend framework, and it's like you think you're using like Symfony or something like that. That's in it's quite nice, but it's just got this massive legacy code base behind it. You're introducing tons of complexity and tons of crazy features that you didn't know existed for the end result. Which backfires.
I feel like anything PHP is usually like a red flag in and of itself. At least it has been for me historically. I don't know about you, Seth.
Yeah, it's been around, like James is saying, it's been around for so long that there's a lot of old cruft that's in there that doesn't necessarily get cleaned out, time after time. And I mean, partially that is for, compatibility's sake, right? Making sure that old, PHP 5 code or whatever will run on a modern binary, but it does introduce a lot of additional complexity that you don't understand is going to be there, right, from a developer perspective. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say don't use it, right, when most developers don't necessarily have that choice. You walk into a large company and that's what they're using, you're stuck, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I would say is, if you're going to use a given framework, see, like, is this based on any other frameworks? Like, how many layers of middleware is this framework adding to your site? What does the middleware actually do? That kind of thing. Like, I saw, like, when I did the cause research, there was loads of middleware, and I think this was probably Node.js, that was just adding ultra permissive cause headers on everything just to be helpful, And so you could just hack loads of stuff out the box, and they had no intent. Like these were Bitcoin exchanges, and they had no intention of using cause at all. But they used some middleware to do their API, and the API was like, well, it's an API, so we'll reflect the origin header and allow credentials true to make the API work as good as possible.
Yeah, that's the
easiest
way to steal cookies and credentials, cookies sessions. Yeah, wow, that's pretty terrible. Yeah, no, I've noticed there's two. Oh, go ahead, Seth.
No, I was just gonna say they were obviously successful at what they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
in more ways than they wanted. So yeah, go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
Oh no, I think I was just gonna say, I've noticed that there are also things that call themselves frameworks that aren't really frameworks, but they're like you piecing together different middleware and trying to build, piecing together middleware and then also choosing your ORM of your choice, or different, one that comes to mind is Node and Express with like CSRF library included and an ORM of your choice, and you're kind of just picking and choosing which things all kind of come together to make a framework, but it's not really a truly like opinionated framework. And I feel like those ones that leave more room for you to, I guess, more flexible in a way, but they give you more granular control, can actually be more problematic, at least in my experience. I don't know if you have any thoughts on something like that. Like if you have thoughts on whether in a more opinionated framework, like a Django is a good example of that. Would you say .NET Core, Seth? I'm not really sure if that's super opinionated. the same
It's
way?
not super opinionated, right? It has a generic layout, but it's not that opinionated. It's not like a Rails or a Django or some of those other very opinionated frameworks. So,
and I think even Spring, you can plug in some different things, but maybe is going more towards the opinionated side of things. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know if you have any preferences, James, or thoughts there.
What I've seen a lot more Rails specific vulnerability classes than I have Django, for sure. Rails does a lot of crazy things.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas Django seems fairly solid. So if you do have a vulnerability in Django, addons.mozilla.org is built on Django. So you can hack that with it and get paid for it, which is worth knowing.
That is worth knowing. That's awesome. I'd say with Django, one thing I like about Django is how security focused their documentation is. And if they give you any opportunity to change a setting and make something less secure, I feel like they do a good job of pointing that out. Whereas, yeah, to your point with Rails, I've got lots of opinions there, but after
GitHub uses Rails for some stuff, don't they?
Yeah,
just
you could say
just
that.
some stuff. You could say that, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny you mentioned that though about middleware and there being some weird behavior there. We've had there have been times where it's like you expect, for instance, say Rack has intercepted some request and you're going to pull some elements out of that request. It's funny because how Rack does that between versions, between two separate type of apps that are maybe it's like chained together apps, which we had I forget the exact context, but we had something like that where we were taking, basically there were two separate middlewares taking requests, and so like what you would get from one app at that middleware layer would totally be different from where it would or how it would look at the next app. So like trying to and then also passing through, I think like a proxy was part of that as well. And so it's basically like a chained, the original request is like basically doesn't look anything like what it looks like at that final end stage. It's so crazy how the differences of how these middlewares handle the request. I mean,
yeah, it's really nasty. HB2 downgrading is another great example of that. It's like people are literally receiving a request in one protocol and rewriting it to a different protocol and applying security rules and then sending it on to the back end. It's like, you're changing the protocol.
Yeah, that's insane.
There's loads of things that can go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that, right? You're like, oh, you just accepted something over TCP. I just rewrote it in UDP. It's fine, right? Like, don't worry about it. And like, if you try to do those comparisons, it shows how kind of insane it is.
Yeah.
But there is, I mean, there's, like you found, right? There's some really good stuff there with that step down from HTTP 2 to HTTP 1 that is still going on. And it's even internal to Nginx and other web servers or redirect proxies or whatever else that's out there. I seem to see it all over the place, right?
Yeah, that's it. And I think it basically comes back to HB2 is so complex that everyone's like, you know what? I don't want to deal with that complexity. I'm just going to convert it into H1 because I understand that. And it just makes everything worse. We're still working on, I said as part of my HB2 research that I was going to release some online web security academy labs so people could practice their HTTP2 hacking techniques. And it's just proved such a nightmare to code these labs because of HTTP2.
Yeah.
We're still working on them. That's like what I spent yesterday on.
Well, that's good. Yeah. I did want to plug that the Web Pen Tester Academy stuff that you guys do over at Portswigger, because if you haven't been through it, right, even as a seasoned professional, it's super useful to practice out some of those techniques and some of the new stuff that's popped up. Yes, there is the XSS stuff. There's kind of the basics that are there, but the new research, right? It's been super useful to actually exercise that and learn about it. And I know, some of the questions that we got for you were very, very specific and very related to, HTTP2 and the request smuggling attacks and how to actually execute those using Burp Suite. And I would probably, tell people, go to the academy first, try it out, make sure it works there before trying it against a site itself. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because if you don't understand the concept with the academy, it's, it's very unlikely that you're going to find it in a new application where it is a bespoke or custom or a different, right? Like where it maybe isn't vulnerable to that exploit. Right?
That's it. I get a huge number of emails. So maybe 90% of my emails are basically saying, can you help me hack this site? Generally with request smuggling, or with some other technique that I did some research on, and I don't really engage with these anymore. I've got a text file with replies that I copy and paste, all very politely phrased. But when I didn't investigate those, or when I do investigate them, because it's like it's on PayPal and it'll be a really big payout if it does work.
Yeah,
and they have offered to split it, which a lot of them don't. Then it's basically always a false positive. It's like if they read the issue description that Burp is giving them, or my extension is giving them, it says this may be a false positive, but they don't, and they try to confirm it correctly, and it doesn't work. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not vulnerable.
Yeah.
Or they just find something slightly weird, like they send this and it times out, and they think it must be vulnerable because they caused a timeout. And it's like, well, a lot of things can cause a timeout. It's the nature of the web.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're not the only ones that get the help me help me hack my friend's cousin's ex-boyfriend's Facebook account, right? Using. Yeah.
I was thinking James needs, like, how so like with HackerOne, or I'm sure BugCrowd has this too, you can put like trigger keywords with a specific what am I trying to say? With a pre-written response that matches that trigger keyword.
Yes, exactly.
So
get some machine learning in there.
Yeah. See, so James, that's all you need for your, you need to write a Slack bot to respond to people for, and then you could be in there and get some research out of it, right? Like, I don't know.
I think I did want to get to one of the questions that we had gotten in for you, since we're starting to get towards the latter part of our hour with you, and it's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. But so one of these questions is, if you could choose one part of a request to attack, if you had to choose just one, a path, a header, something along those lines, what would it be and why?
That's really difficult. I mean, because of request smuggling, I'd be like, a header, the transfer encoding header, because there's so many different ways that can be parsed. Probably, but after that, yeah.
That's a tough question. That's a really tough.
That is really tough. Like, you can do great stuff with the path too, but Orange is better at that kind of stuff, right? So. Yeah,
absolutely.
So ask Orange. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Orange. So did you say Orange Sci? I missed that.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Orange Sci. Research. Yeah, I've been a big fan of the research Orange Sci has released in the past. Actually, speaking of bug bounties and GitHub, there was one that's still my favorite, where it's like 4 different, I think it's like a couple different SSR. There's like 4 different vulnerabilities chained together for like a really cool, impactful hack. And it's like still to this day, one of my favorites. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want to ask. Seth, as I go through these, you want to ask anything you've got?
Yeah, I mean, sorry about that. I got a little bit of a cough. From a general like research perspective, like you've got like the web security, like, so you want to be a web security researcher. Somebody finds a topic, they've read up on it, right? Like, what is it that, like, where do you start, right? Like, what is your like impetus to go after something after you're a little bit familiar with it? Is it turning to like all of the bug bounty researchers, trying some things out, like exercising it locally? Like, what is kind of your first stage when you get to that point?
my first stage is to say, well, say like I've got a hypothesis based on this research that so and so technique might work. Then I'll be like, well, what are the conditions required? And it'll be like the front end does this and the back end does this and the middleware does this. And then I'll be like, well, which is like, what's the least likely condition? And can I test for just that condition with a simple piece of code?
Okay.
And then I'll take that code and run it on all the bounty sites.
On all the bounty sites.
And it's like, if that works, then I do the next condition. And if that works, then I do the next one. And I'm just ready to just dump the research as early as possible.
Okay.
And by the time that but if I have spent a week on something, I've probably confirmed all the conditions and I've got a couple of sites that this technique actually works on.
Yeah. Okay. And that makes sense, right? Like find that least probable condition, test it out. If it doesn't exist, then the research is done and move on. But, being able to eliminate quickly the false positive or the research in and of itself, like the exploit or the vulnerability, is a good way to go about it, right? Don't waste time on things that don't exist.
It's like you take the idea and you break it down into questions that you want to answer. So you want to answer, are there any front ends out there that do X, Y, Z?
Mm-hmm.
And you write some code that answers that question. And regardless of whether your technique worked or failed, you've learned something because you answered the question. And maybe that information will be useful later, even if that research is a complete dead end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yep. Cool. Good. That was my question there. Ken, did you have any others? Like, I know we just got a question in to ask if you could talk about the framework you use internally when testing Burp. I don't know if that's something you can talk about.
Sure. Yeah. So all my extensions use this. So just look at the code of any of my extensions. That said, let me think which one has the least bad code. That's difficult. That's quite difficult. Probably look at Param Miner and look at the scan check stuff and not the actual Param guessing stuff, because that's horrendous. But Param Miner has scan checks for things like, does the server let you use a fat get, for example, which Rails supports by default. It's fantastic. And yeah, if you look at that, you'll see it's just like 10 lines of code to say, does the server support fat get? And there it's this thing of you're not trying to find the vulnerability. You're just trying to find like one condition. And then you can do manual work or code more stuff to do follow-ups based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, follow finding that smallest condition, or, being able to eliminate all the noise using a small condition like that is extremely useful. I mean, from a coding perspective, just in general, not even from a security, exploit perspective.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
We want to be.
I'll just share that link.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right.
I swear I'm having I'm having computer issues too. So sometimes I get a little bit of lag. So, but
that's right. I just shared for GitHub.
Yeah.
Oh, here.
Yeah, I just posted it. There you go. Yep.
Sweet. Oh, nice. Yeah, I can go right to the source and take a look. Sweet. Yeah, definitely do that. I'm going to do that, actually. I'm curious.
It's all terrible code, but it does the job.
Yeah. I feel like that's what security writes, though.
Yeah,
mostly.
Most security tools
code,
is terrible code. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Which params are you looking for when testing remote code execution? Huh. I never thought to ask that. Yeah.
Which I don't look for specific params. I just try and find all the params and then kind of poke them and see what happens, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say I look for these specific parameters. It's more you're looking for indicators, right, in the response.
Yeah, it's especially if you're doing something like bug bounty hunting. What you're trying to do is find a bug that everyone else has missed. So when there's a param called like exec, you're wasting your time looking at it unless you did some amazing recon to find that site anyway. But assuming it's their main site, like I found a remote code execution with /pad scanner, and it was because they were calling PHP's eval on the path, just the path, and if anything was URL encoded, then it like broke the eval or something for some reason. So you were limited in the character set and so on. And like, I found that because no one's looking at trying to put a shell command in the path because it's kind of a weird place.
Yeah.
This wasn't even like the site wasn't RESTful or anything. It was literally just the path. They had some middleware, I think, that just called eval on the path.
Huh. Yeah. And that's where you find those interesting bugs, right? Like, it's typically outside of that norm and outside of that low hanging fruit. I do know Ken was trying to say, like, we do want to be cognizant of your time that you spent it with us, James. This has been very enlightening for me. And, we really appreciate the research that you're putting out, everything that you guys do over there at Portswigger. We're big fans. I mean, I use Burp on a daily basis, right? Like,
Cool. Yeah. I hope there was some useful stuff in there for you guys.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We're big fans, so it's nice to be able to talk to you for an hour and
pick your brain a little bit. Yeah, I appreciate it. Is there anything that you would like to highlight before we go ahead and close things up for today?
Yeah, any upcoming talks, any new research we should be on the lookout for, anything that you want to tease out at all?
I can't tease my upcoming research. I would say be on the lookout for the HB2 labs. They are still coming. People keep asking me when they're coming, and I'm not going to answer that. Soon, as soon as they're ready. Yeah, that's. Oh yeah. Also, this hasn't been publicly announced, but I'm going to be redoing my HB2 talk live for the first time at Black Hat Europe. So if you're able to get to London in the lockdown, then you can watch the only live airing of it.
Awesome.
Nice. That's
so amazing. If you're going, go to James's talk, right? I'm pretty sure we did. Yeah, like we probably won't be there, sadly, right? Like,
I don't think there's going to be many people in the room there. That's just why I'm trying to promote it this.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and call it for today. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks James for being with us and for everything that you do for the community. And yeah, we'll talk to everybody next week. Thanks.